How's it going, everyone? Today we are going to be discussing the immune system. So we'll be talking about the different cells and the different organs and the different barriers that we have to help defend ourselves against certain microbes and to help get rid of damaged cells and dying cells. And so we'll talk all about these different processes that we have in order to regulate our immune system. We have many different cells within our immune system, and we brought these different kinds of cells up during the blood chapter, but some of them are going to promote inflammation. Some of them are just going to engulf different microbes. Some of them are going to help recycle older damaged cells or older damaged proteins within our bodies. And so we'll go through each of these and the different functions that they carry out, and basically what sort of mechanism they use in order to get rid of either old or damaged things in our body or against different invaders, against different pathogens, against different viruses or bacteria. First, let's discuss the lymphoid organs within our body. And we can classify them as either primary, second, or secondary lymphoid organs. The primary lymphoid organs are the red bone marrow and the thymus gland located above the heart. And in the red bone marrow, we discussed how stem cells are eventually going to become the different blood cells. And so these are where B cells and T cells and all these different cells are going to be generated. And within this bone marrow, we then have B cells, which are already mature, but then we have T cells, which are not mature. And so these are going to be transported to the thymus, where that maturation does occur. And then we could also see our secondary lymphoid organs. We have the spleen, the appendix, these lymph nodes, and these are going to be areas of the body where immune responses occur. Where, in like the nodes specifically, we're going to get the removal of different microbes, different bacteria, different substances out from the lymph. So this is where, these are the sites where we're actually removing these foreign invaders from our bodies. Bone marrow is where all of the immune cells are going to originate from the stem cells located in bone marrow. But when we synthesize and when we generate these T cells, they are immature. So they're going to need to travel to the thymus in order to mature. And one of the important things about our thymus is that, again, since it's helping to mature these T cells, it plays a huge role in our immune capabilities. And so as we age, the thymus tends to atrophy. And that's why as we get older, it gets harder to fight off certain invading viruses or bacteria. Because the atrophying of this thymus means that we're going to get less T cells. And these T cells are very important for our immune defense. The secondary lymphoid organs include the lymph nodes, the spleen, and the lymphoid nodules. Lymph nodes are scattered throughout the lymphatic vessels of the body. And again, this is where we are going to filter out bacteria. And so we have particular cells called macrophages, which we'll discuss a little bit later, and lymphocytes, which we just discussed, B cells and T cells, to help destroy these microbes. The spleen is a secondary lymphoid organ, which is actually the largest lymphoid organ. And it also is going to remove certain bacteria or get rid of certain cells, including erythrocytes. The lymphoid nodules include the tonsils, the Peyer's patch, and the appendix. And again, these areas are just going to be responsible for getting rid of certain invaders, certain microbes, certain bacteria out from our bodies. We classify our immune capabilities into two separate categories. We have innate immunity, which is referred to as non-specific immunity, because our body or cells of our immune system are not really recognizing what the particular threat is. It just knows that it is a particular threat. So, bacteria, viruses, all these different substances, these cells are just attacking that foreign invader or that problematic cell or structure just to get rid of it, right? It doesn't have a sense of what it is specifically. And then we're going to talk about adaptive immunity, where we're going to talk about antibodies, and we're going to talk about B cells and T cells. And in those cases, we specifically know what that foreign invader is, and that helps us to defend against that microbe or against that virus. Our first line of defense is obviously our skin. It serves as a physical barrier to protect every organ on the inside of our bodies from different materials in our external environment. But we do have additional barriers when things do enter our body. We have mucus, which we talked about in the respiratory chapter, which is going to help trap certain microbes within our respiratory pathway. We have hair and hair-like projections that are on our cells, and this helps to move different materials away or out of our cells to be filtered out. We have sebum, which is going to help protect the skin versus certain damage and especially dehydration. We have lysozymes, which helps break down material membranes. And then we also have things like gastric juice on the inside of our digestive organs. And this really acidic substance is going to break up a lot of different microbes and a lot of different invading cells. Let's say, however, a pathogen got past our first line of defense. Well, we have different cells and we have different responses that we will undergo in order to get rid of this pathogen. And so natural killer cells and phagocytes will help to engulf and get rid of a lot of bacteria, a lot of microbes. And then we have inflammation. And we'll talk about the steps of inflammation in a little bit. But basically, our body tries to create this environment to help blunt the growth of different microbes. And we'll talk about all of these in a sec, but we have interferons, complements, iron-binding proteins, and antimicrobial proteins, which help, to basically stop the growth of bacteria within our bodies and potentially even kill the bacteria and different microbes within our bodies. An interferon is going to help signal to neighboring cells that there is a virus that is infecting. And so what happens is once that virus finds its way into a cell, the virus replication will activate genes inside of our nucleus that then will synthesize what's called this protein, this interferon. And so that interferon is then released and will bind to receptors on neighboring cells. And this binding serves as basically a signal for then this cell to create antiviral proteins that help block viral replication. So this is one of the methods that our cells use in order to help spread or to prevent the spread of different viruses and bacteria within our bodies. A complement is going to mark a microbe for destruction. And what complements actually do is make a hole within the membrane of the bacteria. And so this makes it easier for antibodies to work, and it also signals for phagocytes to come and engulf and destroy this microbe. So it's just a way to help it helps signal the removal of certain invaders. Phagocytes are cells within our body that help to engulf and digest different microbes, but can also help to get rid of old or damaged cells or old or damaged organelles. And so this process is called phagocytosis, and it's going to start when the phagocyte binds to this microbe. We'll just, again, it could be a damaged cell or organelle or something, but we'll just say microbe since the figure says that. So it adheres, and then a phagosome, which is a vacuole within the phagocyte, is going to engulf the microbe. And then that phagosome is going to fuse with what's called a lysosome. And that lysosome has digestive enzymes, and once those two fuse, those enzymes will help break down this microbe. And that's how we kill or get rid of different pathogens, different invaders that come into our body. But again, remember that this phagocytosis is also important for getting rid of and recycling old or damaged organelles and cells. Inflammation is our body's response to tissue damage. And different cells within our bodies are going to release certain substances which promote vasodilation and the movement of phagocytes and then tissue repair. And so 4 signs and symptoms that come about from this inflammation are redness, pain, heat, and swelling. Inflammation starts with vasodilation. And what this does is that it promotes the more blood flow to the site of that damaged tissue. And since more blood is flowing to that area, well, more white blood cells and more cells of our immune system are also heading to that damaged area. In addition, we're going to get permeability of the capillaries. So like phagocytes, for example, will be able to leave the cardiovascular system and head towards that damaged tissue and get rid of certain microbes in that damage. But we have different things released by cells within our body to help promote that vasodilation and that permeability. And those include histamines, kinins, prostaglandins, which help the function of histamines and kinins, leukotrienes, which will help increase that permeability and are going to promote the movement of the phagocyte to that damaged area, and complements. Phagocytes get drawn towards damaged tissue due to chemotaxis. And so these are different chemicals that are released that promote the movement of the phagocyte from the bloodstream to those microbes in that tissue area. And so they are called chemoattractants, those chemicals. And so it starts first by, the phagocyte will have to squeeze through these little pores within that capillary. Remember that permeability will increase, so it's able to squeeze through and get to that intercellular space. And then those chemoattractants will draw the phagocyte to that damaged area. Once all of the infection, all the bacteria and microbes have been removed, then the tissue repair can occur. And so typically you're going to have a synthesis of proteins to help replace damaged cells and organelles and all these things within our cells. But a lot of times what happens is when we have tissue damage, what's replaced is scar tissue. And so this is obviously not the same cell we started with. What's going to happen is fibroblasts are going to lay down collagen. And so this is how scars are formed. And the downside of this is that it's not going to have the same function, the same elasticity as the old cell. And now there will also be fewer blood vessels in that area. Fever is something that typically accompanies inflammation. And this is our body's way of trying to blunt the growth of bacteria. And so when we get sick, when we have a virus or a bacterial infection, this inflammation, this is our body's defense system. Sure, it's being triggered by this foreign invader, by this bacteria, virus, whatever, but this is our body's response to increase core temperature, to promote inflammation in order to try to get rid of that pathogen, that bacteria, that virus. We also have adaptive immunity, again, which is more specific when it comes to defense against foreign agents. And so in order to detect what a foreign pathogen is, the cells of our adaptive immunity need to detect what are called antigens. An antigen is going to be a recognizable cell or substance that B cells, T cells, and antibodies can bind to and recognize and react to. And so immunobiologists say that a antigen has reactivity. All antigens have reactivity, including our own certain cells. But a complete antigen will also have immunogenicity. And so those two characteristics are very important when it comes to antigens. Immunogenicity is going to be the ability to provoke an immune response by stimulating the production of specific antibodies. And we'll dive into B cells in a second, but these B cells are going to create antibodies in order to try to stop the spread of certain viruses and certain bacteria. Reactivity is an antibody that, reactivity is the antibody binds specifically to the antigen that provoked it. So again, this adaptive immunity, it's very specific. And so different bacteria, different viruses, those are going to have their own antibodies generated when they come into contact with B cells. Antigens are either part of a microbe or an entire microbe, although that it doesn't even need to be a microbe in order to be an antigen. These could be different allergens, things like pollen, which is why you have an allergic response. Your body is actually having and triggering inflammation and immune response versus this foreign antigen. And so, it's basically able to be recognized by these parts called epitopes. And so these are the areas of the antigen that these B cells can recognize. And once they are recognized, antibodies will be generated. Our cells have their own antigens, and it allows the immune cells to know not to attack our own host, our own bodies, right? And so, you're not going to have these antibodies made from self-antigens. We have what's called the major histocompatibility complex, which presents antigens, and they help to, let T cells recognize that the cell isn't foreign. And this is going to be, important as far as tissue transplants and organ transplants are concerned, because if those cells are recognized as, threats, as antigens, there will be rejection. And so, that's why typing for blood and other sort of surgeries and things like that for transplants, like we just discussed, is very important because our body has this internal mechanism that basically wants to attack anything that is invading. And so B cells and T cells, again, make up this adaptive immunity. These cells are called lymphocytes, and they gain their competence by developing antigen receptors on the outside. So these receptors, again, will find these epitopes and these antigens in order to recognize what is actually within our bodies. The types of T cells can be subcategorized into two different types: cytotoxic, CD8 cells, and then helper, or CD4 T cells. And so either the threat is going to be eliminated by cytotoxic T cells or by antibodies produced by B cells. And so cell-mediated adaptive immunity is using those cytotoxic T cells. They attack the infected body cells or cancer cells or foreign cells that we need to get rid of. And antibody-mediated is going to be, again, through the production by B cells. And then these antibodies will basically inactivate these bacteria, these pathogens, and a lot of times prevent them from replicating and dividing and stopping that growth, that spread of these foreign invaders. Here we can see cell-mediated and antibody-mediated immunity. Again, the lymphocytes, the B cells and T cells are produced via the bone marrow. B cells already mature and enter the circulation, while T cells have to mature at the thymus. T cells are either cytotoxic or helper T cells. Cytotoxic T cells, when they are activated, are going to help attack antigens. And then we also have B cells, which are going to release antibodies in order to, again, inactivate antigens. And so, where do helper T cells come in? Well, helper T cells are going to recognize certain antigens, right? And when when helper T cells become active, they're going to activate either cytotoxic T cells or B cells. And that's going to lead to, again, these cells just becoming active and basically getting rid of the threat that has entered our bodies. We just explained this on the last slide, but just go through it quickly. Helper T cells are going to help activate B cells or cytotoxic T cells. The cytotoxic T cells will help kill off invaders and will use cell-mediated immunity to eliminate specific antigens. So that's just the classification. Cytotoxic T cells, that's called cell-mediated. They are usually inactive, but then again become activated when the foreign antigen has entered the body. The helper T cells will recognize it through those receptors and then help to activate cytotoxic T cells. And what's cool about this adaptive immunity is that we have memory of previous exposure to certain antigens. And so when a helper T cell becomes activated, we're going to have proliferation and differentiation. So we're going to get more of these T cells. And so, we have these memory helper cells that basically when we then again come into contact with this antigen, we're going to have a response and we're going to be able to better defend ourselves against that antigen in the future. Cytotoxic T cells also have receptors, but are going to receive help from helper T cells to become activated. And then once we have activated T cells, they will also proliferate and differentiate. And then we're going to have some active ones which attack infected body cells. And then we're going to have memory cytotoxic T cells, which again help in the long term against these different invasions. Antibody-mediated immunity is carried out by B cells. There's large quantities of these B cells in the spleen, lymphoid, lymph nodes, so these secondary lymphoid organs, and they become activated. And so they undergo clonal selection, and sometimes B cells will become plasma cells, which secrete these specific antibodies, or they become memory cells, again, to differentiate into more plasma cells in the future to help carry out the defense for specific antigens or specific microbes. Here we see a figure of that. We have an inactive B cell, a microbe, an antigen will then, brush up against this receptor, which activates the B cell. The T cell will help to co-stimulate this active B cell, and then, once this B cell becomes activated, it's going to start to proliferate and differentiate. And so again, certain ones, plasma cells, are going to secrete antibodies, which help blunt and destroy this microbe. And then we have memory cells, which are going to live down the line and going to help us in future defense. Antibodies are going to fit specifically to the epitopes of a antigen, and so they are like a lock and a key, very similar to a hormone and a receptor. They are specific matches. The antibody is specifically made to attack that specific microbe, that specific antigen. And so antibodies are under the group of globulins, and so they're referred to as immunoglobulins. And here we could see the structure of antibodies, both with heavy chains and light chains and binding sites. There are basically all types of antibodies, and they could do numerous different functions in order to protect us against certain bacteria or viruses. And so you could block the certain toxins of bacteria, you could prevent viruses from entering the cell, we could clump antigens together for easier phagocytosis. But these antibodies overall, they just have their own functions depending on their classification in order to prevent the infiltration of that antigen into our cells and finds ways to basically destroy and get rid of these antigens. Adaptive immunity can come either via active or passive exposure. And so active exposure or natural exposure is going to be when a person's own immune system responds to a microbe. But also what this includes is artificial adaptive immunity. And so this comes in the form of vaccines. And so a lot of times what a vaccine is just a dead version of the virus, and then that introduces it to your body, and then those receptors of our lymphocytes are going to bind to that dead, that dead virus, and then they're going to do the same thing. They're going to activate helper cells, activate T cells, activate B cells in order to form antibodies, and then we're going to have memory cells that remember that antigen. And so if we ever then in the future come introduced with that same virus, that same antigen, well, our body's response is going to be a whole lot quicker. Passive acquired immunity can either be naturally from a mother to a fetus, either through time that the fetus spent in the placenta or through the breast milk that a baby will ingest. So it's going to take in those immunoglobulins through that. Or we could also have artificial serums that contain antibodies that are injected in from one person to another. And so these are, again, we're getting into different types of artificial treatments to help spread against the different viruses and the different bacteria that could be transmitted. What we are going to see is that adaptive immunity is going to help us in future responses when we come into contact with a previously known virus or bacteria. And so, if we get sick one time, our body is going to have its immune response. But then if we get exposed in the future, well, we are going to have these helper cells. We're going to have this sort of memory of this virus, of this bacteria, of this pathogen. And that's going to help with our immune response. And that's going to increase our ability to produce antibodies and to activate cytotoxic T cells. And what that's going to do is basically help from the exposure, from the virus, from the pathogens of being as bad. And so we're better able then to fight off a second response when we've already come into contact with that virus. Self-recognition is going to prevent our T cells from attacking our own cells. And so once those T cells are able to recognize that the cells of our own body are ours and not a foreign invader, they won't attack them. And so certain autoimmune diseases, including HIV/AIDS, has an effect where over time, this self-recognition, this self-tolerance is sort of wastes away if you don't have any sort of regulation over it. So the cells of the body start attacking themselves. And so this is where a lot of autoimmune diseases come into play, because this inflammation is not good for microbes and bacteria and different pathogens, but this is how we get rid of them. But if we have those inflammation responses and those immune responses turned on all the time and they're attacking our own cells, well, this is going to lead to the deterioration of our health. An allergic reaction is part of the immune response. So again, our body's going to be able to have receptors on different things. And so sometimes we are different than others when it comes to handling certain substances within our body. And so some may get allergies in the spring where they sneeze 12 times in a row, while others don't have anything like that. And so you could have this allergic response occurring and it's immediate hypersensitivity, or sometimes it's delayed. And so, again, expect that redness, that swelling, these allergic reactions, can bring about all sorts of symptoms. And that's it. And so we discussed all the different immune cells within our body and the different functions within our immune system, the different types of immune organs, and how our body mediates different threats. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next video.